In this podcast episode, Joe Rogan interviews filmmaker Andrew Jarecki, known for his work on the Jinx and the Alabama Solution. Their conversation spans the harrowing realities of the Alabama prison system, systemic corruption and abuse, the complexities of incarceration and rehabilitation, the impact of private prison interests, and broader reflections on American society, justice, and media consumption. Jarecki also shares insights into his approach to storytelling, podcast curation, and human curiosity. Andrew Jarecki begins by discussing his documentary, The Alabama Solution, which exposes extreme brutality, corruption, and neglect within the Alabama state prison system. Despite the devastating conditions documented, the story remains largely unknown to the public. Jarecki attributes this secrecy to prisons functioning almost like black sites where media access is restricted and transparency is minimal. This lack of oversight enables systemic abuses and cover-ups, including the deaths of over 1,000 inmates without proper investigations. He highlights specific cases such as Stephen Davis, who died after being brutally beaten by a violent guard, Rod Gadsden, and Robert Earl Council, an inmate who led nonviolent strikes and was violently retaliated against. The documentary reveals how contraband cell phones and cameras smuggled in by corrupt guards allow inmates to document abuses, yet these same officers profit by selling drugs and phones to prisoners, creating a deeply corrupt ecosystem. Jarecki details the astonishing prevalence of drug addiction inside prisons, with estimates that around 80% of inmates are addicted to substances they often became dependent on after incarceration. Drugs like fentanyl and synthetic opioids, e.g. Flocka, are introduced into prisons in innovative ways, including on paper, similar to how LSD is distributed, making enforcement extremely difficult. Corrupt guards sustain this illicit trade, doubling their salaries through drug and phone sales, and inadvertently fueling overdoses and further violence inside the facilities. The conversation turns to the conditions of forced labor in prisons. Jarecki explains how incarcerated people are leased to perform various jobs, from landscaping work at the governor's mansion to laboring in fast food establishments and industrial plants. Despite the work being coerced under threat of solitary confinement or further punishment, prisoners earn meager wages, e.g. $2 a day, often reduced by fees for transportation and uniforms. This system mirrors historic convict leasing, essentially perpetuating modern slavery, with prison labor generating substantial profits for companies and the state, while prisoners see almost none of the benefit. Andrew gives a vivid picture of the mental health crisis inside prisons, describing solitary confinement cells as tiny, windowless spaces where inmates endure years of isolation, interrupted only by brief, voiceless counseling sessions given through a slot in the cell door. Such conditions aggravate mental illnesses rather than rehabilitate. Guards often lack training to handle mentally ill inmates and may respond with violence, exacerbating inmate suffering. Jarecki emphasizes the trauma experienced by both prisoners and their families, noting the minimal support given upon release, such as a $50 bus ticket, and how this failure contributes to high recidivism rates. The systemic corruption within the Alabama prison system stands out, with Jarecki describing it as a criminal enterprise where nobody, governors, guards, or legislators, are held accountable. Despite overwhelming evidence of brutal abuses and a Department of Justice report condemning Alabama's prisons, the state's response has been to build new billion-dollar facilities rather than reform the system or improve conditions. The construction contracts and industry interests have turned incarceration into a lucrative business, christened by Jarecki as the Alabama Department of Construction. Meanwhile, investigations are obstructed, oversight is minimal, and violent guards continue to be promoted rather than punished. Jarecki discusses the wider prison industrial complex beyond Alabama, including the involvement of private companies that profit from incarceration. Corporations like Geo Group, CoreCivic, and Securus Communications thrive financially only when prisons remain full and services, such as inmate phone calls or video visitations, are monetized at high rates. For instance, contracts requiring video visits to replace in-person visits charge families exorbitant fees, often preventing genuine human contact. He highlights how corporate structures diffuse responsibility, making it easier for unethical behavior to flourish unchecked, prioritizing profit over humanity. The discussion extends beyond prisons to consider societal influences like social media, which Jarecki and Rogan agree exacerbate mental health issues by fostering addiction to outrage and tribalism. They observe how polarization and echo chambers online force individuals into rigid ideological tribes that encourage conforming to groupthink and discourage nuanced perspectives. This reduction of complex social issues to binary choices feeds into political and social dysfunction. They stress that much of this behavior is a distraction from personal problems and a deterioration of authentic human connection, which in turn contributes to societal fragmentation. Jarecki shares insights into his approach as a filmmaker and podcaster, emphasizing authentic curiosity over chasing fame or controversy. He chooses guests based on genuine interest rather than popularity or shock value, aiming for deep conversational interviews rather than rigid Q&A formats. For him, the value lies in exploring people's stories, motivations, and perspectives over extended periods, allowing moments of spontaneity and vulnerability to emerge. This method fosters organic, insightful dialogue reflective of human complexity. The conversation shifts to Jarecki's acclaimed series The Jinx, which chronicled the life and confessions of Robert Durst, a wealthy and enigmatic figure accused of multiple murders. Jarecki recounts how Durst ultimately confessed to crimes during a bathroom break recorded by a live microphone, a pivotal moment that aided prosecution. The show also exposed the disparities in the justice system, contrasting Durst's privileged treatment with the harsh conditions faced by prisoners in places like Alabama. The case exemplifies the complicated nature of culpability, truth, and media's role in criminal investigations. Throughout the episode, Jarecki and Rogan reflect on the purpose and efficacy of incarceration. They reject simplistic dichotomies of bad people versus good people, acknowledging the prevalent systemic failures that funnel nonviolent offenders, many addicts or mentally ill, into punishing, damaging environments rather than rehabilitative frameworks. They argue for investing in early education, community support, and mental health services to reduce crime rates and create opportunities for vulnerable populations. The current system, they contend, too often hardens inmates, setting them up for failure upon release and perpetuating a cycle of violence and poverty. A key theme is the critical role of transparency and investigative journalism. Jarecki stresses how secrecy protects abuse and corruption in prisons and other institutions. Freedom of the press functions as a necessary check on power, exposing wrongdoing and enabling public accountability. He laments the decline of robust civil rights enforcement by the Department of Justice and the chilling effect on reporting abuses inside prisons. The powerful impact of the Alabama solution in raising public awareness underscores the need for more such fearless exposure. Jarecki emphasizes the importance of viewing society as an interconnected community where the treatment of each member reflects collective values. Dehumanizing prisoners through de-individualization, the stripping away of identity and dignity, enables cruelty and neglect. Conversely, acknowledging shared humanity can create impetus for reform and compassion. He calls for a nuanced understanding of justice that balances accountability with opportunities for redemption and growth, reinforcing social bonds rather than fracturing them. Rogan and Jarecki discuss the difficulty of maintaining thoughtful discourse in a media environment dominated by polarization, sensationalism, and misinformation. They highlight how platforms incentivize division and anger for engagement, contributing to widespread anxiety and radicalization. Jarecki notes efforts he has seen among younger generations to disconnect or detox from social media, seeking healthier interactions. Both advocate for more meaningful, multidimensional conversations that respect complexity and foster empathy. Jarecki reflects on the sustaining force behind his work, an enduring curiosity about humanity, history, and the forces shaping society. This curiosity fuels his commitment to exploring difficult subjects and diverse perspectives, providing ongoing intellectual and emotional engagement. He sees curiosity as vital both personally and culturally, fostering connection and understanding in an often fractured world. Jarecki shares personal anecdotes about encounters with individuals affected by incarceration, including violent episodes within the prison system and the transformation of people through trauma and survival. These stories illustrate the cyclical nature of violence and the urgent need for systemic change. They also reinforce his view that many incarcerated individuals hold untapped potential and humanity that society neglects. Jarecki and Rogan analyze how financial motivations distort justice systems. Corporations profiting from incarceration have vested interests in maintaining high prison populations and punitive policies, undermining reforms aimed at rehabilitation or decriminalization. This economic framework has led to perverse incentives where more aggressive prosecution and extended sentences yield financial rewards for stakeholders, perpetuating cycles of incarceration and social harm. The dialogue broadens to social commentary on American inequality, education, and opportunity. Jarecki critiques the inadequate investment in public schools, mental health, and community resources, especially in impoverished and marginalized areas where crime is concentrated. He stresses the importance of addressing root causes of crime through systemic improvements rather than relying solely on punishment. This would not only reduce prison populations, but enhance societal well-being and economic productivity over time. They address the addictive nature of social media, likening chronic engagement with toxic online discourse to a form of mental illness. Jarecki observes how constant digital distraction diminishes people's ability to engage authentically with one another, exacerbating feelings of isolation and anger. Both acknowledge the challenges and efforts involved in encouraging people, especially youth, to step back and reclaim focus on real-world relationships and interests. Throughout the podcast, Jarecki returns to the theme of human connection as foundational to addressing societal problems. Whether in the context of prison reform, social media, or interpersonal relations, fostering genuine empathy and understanding helps combat dehumanization, reduces polarization, and opens paths toward healing and justice. Authentic conversation and curiosity are portrayed as key tools in this endeavor. The episode advocates using transparency not only to expose abuses, but as a mechanism for systemic reform. Jarecki notes successful grassroots efforts inspired by the Alabama solution, including bipartisan political responses and public demonstrations demanding prison oversight. The film has empowered families and communities affected by incarceration to speak out, signaling the potential for media to drive meaningful change. Jarecki critiques contemporary legal and political structures that fail to adequately protect civil rights, investigate abuses, or provide equitable justice. The dismantling of the DOJ's Civil Rights Division and political unwillingness to address corruption perpetuate systemic problems. He stresses the need for continued advocacy and vigilance to restore accountability and humane standards within state institutions. The conversation touches on the value of art and storytelling, including stand-up comedy, documentaries, and narrative films, as ways to explore human nature, challenge assumptions, and foster empathy. Jarecki praises performers like Dave Chappelle and the detailed craft involved in creating impactful stories, underscoring the unique power of authentic expression to connect and enlighten. Rogan and Jarecki discuss the educational value of long-form interviews and podcasts as spaces for undistracted, in-depth exploration of complex ideas. These formats contrast with the fleeting, shallow exchanges typical of social media, providing audiences richer engagement with diverse viewpoints and nuanced information, contributing to a better-informed public discourse. The interview acknowledges that supporting reform does not equate to being soft on crime. There is broad agreement that violent offenders must be held accountable and society deserves safety. However, the episode advocates nuanced policies that differentiate between types of offenses and focus on rehabilitation when possible, aiming to reduce recidivism and promote community health without compromising justice. Throughout the episode, Jarecki and Rogan emphasize the complexity of human morality, recognizing that people possess both good and bad qualities, and circumstances heavily influence behavior. This complexity suggests that simplistic categorizations often fail, pointing toward compassionate yet pragmatic approaches to justice and social policy. They explore how modern media, particularly on social platforms, contributes to exaggerated polarization by rewarding extreme content and suppressing nuance. This fractured media environment undermines thoughtful dialogue and deepens divisions, creating challenges for democratic deliberation and collective problem solving. Early educational programs and community support are identified as critical levers to prevent crime and incarceration. Jarecki highlights the success of initiatives like Head Start and Maine's Humane prison programs that provide vocational training and meaningful work opportunities, reducing long-term involvement with the criminal justice system. The episode closes on reflections about individual curiosity, responsibility, and engagement as drivers for social understanding and change. Jarecki credits personal authenticity, open-mindedness, and sustained inquiry as key to navigating complex societal challenges and enriching human relationships both publicly and privately.